Join the Israel Vision team in a three-part series for a comprehensive look at what the top echelon of the Israeli government is saying. Israel Vision reports to you from the second annual Herzliya conference on the balance of national strength and security for Israel. The overall topic at this year's conference was Israel in battle and in the international arena. The Herzliya conference, hosted by the Interdisciplinary Center, focuses this year on the political and military struggle in which Israel finds itself in light of the major changes that have occurred in the Middle East, Central Asia, and in the USA. The conference brings together Israel's decision-making leadership, senior figures from the realms of foreign and security policy, economics, government, and top Israeli academics. In this program, Part 3, you'll meet Natan Sharansky, a member of Knesset and Minister of Housing and Construction in the Cabinet. This former Jewish refusenik and dissident spent years in solitary confinement in the former Soviet Union because he demanded his right as a Jew to return to the land of his forefathers, Israel. Today, he will speak of some of his experiences as a persecuted Jew and the importance of strengthening the post-Soviet Jewish community in Russia with its connections to Israel. Before I start talking about the Jewish people as an element of national strength, and I welcome what was said about the Jewish people as the building block of that, I would like to say a few words about the state of Israel as an important element in the national strength of the Jewish people as a whole. To illustrate this point, let me talk first about Russia, or rather the former Soviet Union.
And on the side of their oppressors, there was power.
In the former Soviet Union, we were assimilating Jews. Millions of Jews, and myself included, were assimilated, and we knew nothing about our religion, our history, our heritage, our festivals and holidays. We only knew that we were Jews as a result of anti-Semitism and the fact that it was written in the identity cards of our parents. We felt helpless as we had to try and cope with our Jewishness and try and find ways to bypass this problem within an anti-Semitic environment, and that without having any kind of Jewish identity. And when did that change? It was in 1967 when we heard Mota Gur's voice over the radio saying, "The Temple Mount is in our hands." We heard it on the Voice of Israel on the radio, and in spite of the fact they tried to interfere with the broadcast, we heard it anyway.
In 1967, Israel was fighting for survival. The Soviet media announced that Tel Aviv was in flames and that the Jewish state was finished. 6 days later, the war was over, and despite Soviet predictions, Israel still existed. From that moment, the prayer "Next Year in Jerusalem" grew in the hearts of Soviet Jews.
Honestly, we didn't really know what the Temple Mount was. We didn't know anything. There were probably a few Jews that didn't assimilate, but the majority of Jews in the USSR didn't know anything. We only knew that there was a state of Israel that was fighting for its right to survive. Once we saw that Israel managed to win a war against its enemies, we suddenly saw how the attitude towards us as assimilated Jews suddenly changed. They, the anti-Semitic Gentiles, still hated us, but at least now they respected us a bit more. Power is one thing that they respect in Russia. Suddenly, we came to realize that when the State of Israel fought for its right to exist, it was also fighting for our own honor and respect. And so it was that powerless Jewish people suddenly realized that even though their security and welfare was dependent on how loyal they were to the regime, and didn't dare to say or read or think what they shouldn't, all of a sudden, those same people became proud of their Jewishness. In the eyes of the people around us, we became part of the identity of the State of Israel, fighting over there. And all of a sudden, we had power. Once we realized that for all those years, we mistakenly thought that we belonged to a different history, that our identity had nothing to do with affiliating oneself with a different society, another culture, we felt weak and defenseless. Suddenly now, we realized that it was not true. Once we perceived ourselves differently, we suddenly realized that our whole life is on a continuum, coming all the way down from the Exodus out of Egypt. We finally realized that the State of Israel means that there are Jews out there who want to support us and are willing to support us, as long as we made clear that we are proud to be Jewish and want to come to Israel. One can further analyze the reasons for the revival of Jewish life in the USSR and what caused millions of Jews to come on Aliyah, but undoubtedly the main element was and is Israel's national strength. Our return to Jewish free life was undoubtedly the existence of the State of Israel. In Russia, more than any other place, we see today a dramatic decrease in the size of the Jewish community. There, in the former Soviet Union, thanks to, well, first of all, a process of the ingathering of the exiles, which I hope will continue until its final happy conclusion. As a result, however, the size of the Jewish population is shrinking in a very dramatic way. There were millions upon millions of Jews, and now the number of Jews in the former Soviet Union has decreased into a mere few hundreds of thousands. Interestingly, however, the ability of Russian Jewry to strengthen Israel and influence Russian foreign policy towards Israel has increased. This means that there is no contradiction between strengthening Israel and the decrease of numbers of Jews in the diaspora, because both are an integral part of the security of Israel. Now, what actually happened in Russia? Looking back the last few decades, the main two things that happened were the downfall of communism and the Soviet Empire, and the major aliyah, which are, of course, interconnected. There are all sorts of data, and I won't go into it now. Now we are talking about a lot less than 1 million Jews, which are entitled to become citizens of Israel, according to the law of return, which is a lot less than the millions that used to be there just only a few years ago. What dramatic change took place in the relations between the Russian government and the Russian Jews? Well, a lot has happened in the past decade to bring about many dramatic changes. But one of the main and most significant changes was the change in the attitude toward minorities and immigrants. President Putin, in a few informal talks with me, always comes back to the same point, namely, he said, in Tsarist Russia and in the former Soviet Union, we always repeated the same mistake. And that was our attitude to minorities. Assimilation was a desirable thing for the national strength of Russia, and therefore minorities were encouraged to assimilate, and all those who wanted to leave should have left. But we changed it. We changed the attitude. Nowadays, we see minorities, the Jewish community included, as a very important facilitator of strengthening the cultural and social life in Russia. And I welcome any development of Jewish life in Russia. As President of Russia, I would like to see all the Russian speakers living today in Israel and the United States, France, and in other places. I'd like to see them as people who understand us, who are near us, and close to us in their attitudes. When the President of Russia says this 3 times of his own initiative, then apparently he has a political interest in saying so. When we look at the everyday politics, we will realize that this is not mere empty words. It's not a matter of propaganda. In the West, we're used to hearing Russian propaganda, but this isn't, because we can learn about the opportunities. When we see the opportunities that Russian authorities are providing the Jewish community, there are about 200 communities where Jews live, and we meaning both the State of Israel and the Jewish organizations in the diaspora, they have hundreds of Jewish community centers there, hundreds of schools. These buildings are the proof that Russia wants to encourage its Jewish population. Following the same lines of Russian policy, we can see that when the president of Russia goes to Paris, he tries to strengthen his relations with the grandchildren of pro-Tsarist people who immigrated from Russia 80 years ago at the time of the revolution. This is an intentional policy, a deliberate policy intended at strengthening the ties between the Russian administration and the Jewish community within Russia. And of course, there are many sects and factions there. There are also some close to the president, some not so close to him, just as in any other community, in any other state. But the big picture is that Russia wants to strengthen the ties with the Jewish community in Russia because they see the Jewish community as a bridge for peace and access to the West. A final example in this respect is that President Putin has decided that it is now time for amending the Jackson Law, which was one of the most important tools in the struggle for the liberation of Russian Jewry.
And I said, as long as they're persecuting people who want to leave Russia, Jew and non-Jew alike, it applies to all, that they ought to first live up to their treaties.
I didn't think that it would be possible to go to Israel. And when I realized that it was, in principle at least, possible, I started thinking about it.
Today, if you, in the Soviet Union, if you apply to leave, you lose your job.
When I applied for a character reference, and I had to write there that I intend to go to Israel, I was fired the same day.
They are bound by treaty to allow people who have applied to leave. And we are using the economic advantage that we have to get them to comply with the law.
Senator Henry Jackson's law linked American trade concessions with the USSR for freedom for Soviet Jews. Now the only place on earth that can amend it is in the U.S. Senate. So how is he going to do that? First, he's going to exchange a few words with President Bush in Shanghai. Then, coming back to Moscow, he'll request the show of representatives of diverse Jewish communities from all over Russia. Next, he will meet with them and send them to Israel and the U.S. to talk to important figures in order to pool their influence to change the Jackson Amendment. In this way, the Russian government is using the Jews in what seems like their traditional role as courtsmen, so to speak, but with one important difference. They don't have to. They'll do it because it's the right thing to do. Russian officials say, you have complete freedom to develop a Jewish life within Russia. And they're encouraged to do that. And also, they do not hesitate in expressing strong identification with Israel. Sometimes even stronger identification and support than just formal political expressions. The Russian authority sees this identification with Israel on the part of the Jewish community as a good thing, which represents their opinion. This is because they are strengthening their own position within the government due to the official Russian backing of Israel. They see these Jewish communities as an important bridge to the West, and of higher importance than other minority groups. At the same time, the Jewish community's identification with Israel is an important source of strength for themselves. It is interesting that the Russian authorities not only see the Russian Jewish communities of today as a bridge with the West, but also they consider Israel an important country, because there are over 1 million Russian Jews here. I heard this for the first time, I think, in the beginning of 1991 from talks with the then Russian vice president. He'd had a few cups of vodka during our discussions, and all of a sudden he said, "We are not going to allow anyone, including the Egyptians, we're not going to allow anyone to insult Israel, because this is our country. It belongs to us." At that time, actually, the Soviet Union was still alive, and this was the vice president. Well, I was quite scared hearing that, even though he'd had a few cups of vodka. But I had no need to fear. He was expressing this feeling because 25% of the Jews here came from the Soviet Union. He went on by saying, "You know that my mother was also Jewish?" Well, I didn't know about that, and I wasn't going to argue about that either. This kind of approach is something that we have heard many times since, and I have come to realize that there's no reason to be scared by this attitude. It is just a manifestation of support. This support is not because they feel as if we're part of their empire, but rather they want to count on the fact that they can find support and understanding in Israel. There are many people here who are victims of the same regimes as they were, and they hope that this can be helpful in building bridges towards the West. Indeed, when there arises conflicts between Russia and the West, it turns out that Israel, for various reasons, such as coping with terrorism, fundamentalist Islam, and other issues, Israel apparently is more understanding. Now, an interesting phenomenon is the fact that Russia sees Israel and the Jewish communities as a bridge to the West. If the influence of the American Jews over the administration results from their clout, meaning the growth of the community and its wealth within the U.S., in Russia the opposite is true. The number of Russian Jews is decreasing in Russia, and their clout in other countries is increasing. Their numbers are growing in Israel and in the United States. Some have good relations with the president and other important figures in those countries. In any case, they don't have any influence over what is happening inside of Russia. Now, since the Russian administration sees them as serving the important role of bridge builders with the West, Israel has this very important role as a bridge. This is what affects their inner policy. We can say, okay, then Russia can make use of this fact. But I must make this point and draw attention to the fantastic development of Jewish life within the former Soviet Union. I feel the need to emphasize the programs delivered by the Jewish Agency, the Lishkat HaKesher, the Liaison Bureau, and other elements who are working to strengthen Jewish identity in the former Soviet Union. These undertakings are actually the most important element of what we, the State of Israel, can and must do. This is what allows us to have some influence. For example, look at the attitude of the Russian administration today towards Arafat. And don't forget that he used to be one of their allies, traditionally over many years. If you compare the Russian attitude toward him with the attitude of some Western countries who are supposed to be our democratic allies, just look at their attitude toward Ariel Sharon and his government, and compare that to the Russian attitude toward us. If you look at that, you will realize that we do have the ability to pull some influence. Therefore, I would say that as an element of national strength, Russian Jewry is first, of course, part of the ingathering of the exiles. But it is also an influential element within Russia, and there's no contradiction. We can still push for Aliyah while reinforcing the Jewish identity and Jewish life in Russia, and as a result, strengthen Israel's status both here and in the diaspora. Thank you.
I think that Aliyah is just the continuation of life here in Israel, and I think that it's the best answer for all the troubles we are unfortunately still have in this country. The very fact that you see young, intelligent people coming here on their own, that's their choice. What I basically said to them is that you will hear a lot of people saying, thank you for your coming, you're so courageous, and it's wrong, because they are, I think, making the right choice. They're right now, I guess, starting a new life here in Israeli universities, and hopefully in 10, 15, 20 years we'll see happy Israeli families of which these kids will be part, as fathers, mothers of future Israeli students. And I think that on a larger scale, definitely if we want to continue growing here economically, if we want to improve the social frame of our society, I think that Aliyah is the only answer.
You, as young Russian Jews, are coming here to this country. What does that mean to you?
It means it's a good country. I love this country because it's my historic
homeland.
Yes, homeland, and I love people who lives there, and I want to learn my historic language, Ivrit, and I would like to learn medicine here, because it's medicine here is best medicine in maybe in Europe.
That's right.
Yeah.
And before you came, did you young people hear about the Dolphinarium bombing, and you understand what's happening here? It's not very peaceful right now.
Yes, I know about this. It's I don't know how it would be.
This is my fourth and last trip to Israel.
Fourth and last trip.
Yes.
And as a young Russian Jewish woman, how does it make you feel to come back to this country to finally live?
Well, first of all, it has been my dream for a long time to make Aliyah. It was a dream of my family, and
in a while, my mother will also come to the country, and I'm waiting for her. Almost all of my family are in the country, and I knew that Israelis love people, especially who make Aliyah, but I never imagined that we would get such a reception. I really feel that people here are awaiting us with open arms. I think that now everybody is just happy to be here and to have such a reception. The atmosphere is very special, and spirits are up. I think that only in Israel can this be found. People are happy when new immigrants join the population.
What kind of prospect really do people here in this country have when you have a majority of Palestinian people supporting fundamentalist Islamic Hamas?
I believe that 15 years ago, half the world was covered with totalitarian regimes that spoke very much like Sheikh Yassin on different subjects. Today we can count on fingers of actually one hand whatever we have left of totalitarian countries. Unfortunately, most of them are our neighbors. But I do believe that they don't have any more milieu to continue existing the way they do. And I do believe that in 10, 15 years from now, not only these kids, but also us, will be able to see a different Arab leadership that will speak quite differently. In the meanwhile, I do think that we have military and economic power to explain to Sheikh Yassin or Arafat or whatever the case might be that it's not in the best of their interest to continue talking like that. But very soon, I am sure that the Palestinian people, as well as any other Arab nation, will be electing a different type of leadership that will realize that for the new Middle East, the only way is to make real peace with Israel, not just to sign agreements, but to really coexist here in the area.